This is Office Talk with Annette Stepanian. Well, hello there. Annette here, and I'm so honored that you're back for another episode of Office Talk. I am particularly excited to introduce you to today's guest because not only is she a USC Trojan like me, woohoo, fight on, but she has quite the breadth of experience when it comes to entrepreneurship. Samira Far actually launched her career after quitting her job at an accounting firm because she realized she really wanted to start her own business and really explore entrepreneurship. And so she decided to start a wildly successful nail salon chain called Bellacures. Now, she was one of the first to do this where, ladies, it's those salons with the really big, comfortable chairs and you get like a million nail polish color options and they're super clean. And after building that up and growing that to the successful business that it is today, she recently partnered up with one of her friends to start a jewelry company called Fred and Far. In addition to running all of these businesses, Samira is a contributor to Inc.com, and she commonly writes about different issues related to entrepreneurship. Now, this episode is great for anybody in business, but if you're particularly interested in brick and mortar stores or product-based businesses, Samira has a lot of experience in that. But we also dive into a whole bunch of topics, including how we can delegate more effectively and other qualities and characteristics we need to have in order to build a business and life that is fulfilling. So with that said, let's go to the show. Hey, Samira, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so let's bring our listeners up to speed. I know you've had quite a entrepreneurial experience. You've been doing this for quite a long time, but maybe you can tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got started with entrepreneurial adventures.
Okay, so when I graduated college, I immediately took on a full-time job working at KPMG in their risk advisory and sort of consulting department. And growing up, I had always known that I wanted to own my own company one day, and I would look to sort of other entrepreneurs or other business owners, and they would always be older. So I always had this vision in my mind of, when I'm older and I have a lot of money and I know what I'm doing, I'm going to own a company one day. And so as soon as I started working for KPMG, I felt this out of body experience a little bit where I felt like my soul was not in the room and I didn't feel connected to what I was doing there work-wise. And after about 10 months, I decided, okay, I'm going, my energy and my youthful energy is going to expire at this job. And I can't allow myself to have such a death so early out of college. I'm going to leave. And when I left, I had this feeling okay, I get it. I kind of understand what work is, and I'm never going to have enough experience or enough money. That's an insatiable thing. So there's never going to be a point at which I'm going to be okay, now I know what I'm doing and I'm going to start a company. And so I thought the exact opposite of what I thought when I was younger. And my thought was, I should start a company now because if I mess up and if I fail, I can just pretend it never happened. I'm young enough where I could just slip it under the rug and lose some things, maybe go back home and live with my family until I figure it out again. I think the stakes get higher as you get older. So I decided to explore that option, and I had a bunch of ideas, maybe 5 to 10 ideas that I had come up with when I was in college of various businesses that I would want to eventually be in one day. I still sort of have I always have somewhere a handful of ideas in my back pocket and they evolve every year. They're different. And I'm oh, that's something that I want to eventually do one day. And they're all so different. They have nothing to do with each other. They're in different industries. And so one of them when I was in college was I want to create a branded nail salon operation because nail salons are so fragmented. There's no loyalty or customer service experience. And generally they're mom and pop shops run by immigrant families who are really only competing on one thing, which is price. And there's an opportunity to compete on all these other value systems that the consumer market was willing to pay for. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to create a better operation, touch on things that consumers care about, like cleanliness and quality and customer service communication. And then I'm going to charge a little bit more and see what happens. And so 2006, I opened my first location. which is Bellacures in Los Angeles. And it took me about 3 years to learn how to run a small business. It was a huge learning curve. Obviously, I was 22 or 23 at the time, and I had no idea what I was doing. I did not know how to manage employees. I did not know how to manage anything, actually, because I didn't have any management experience. So by year 3, I was at a place where, well, first of all, immediately took off. We got some good press, and immediately it became, LA's #1 nail salon, the best of, word of mouth spread really quickly just because we were doing something that wasn't really being done in that market space before. So at year 3, I had a whole bunch of interest from customers, friends and family, and friends of friends, of people who wanted to partner up with me and try to expand the brand. And I knew at the time, and I'm happy that I knew, that I didn't know what it meant to have a business partner, so I wasn't willing to take one on. I was like, that doesn't seem like such a great idea because I don't know who this person is and how could they become my partner. So I set up my business concept to be a franchise, and I turned that interest of, people who wanted to be my partner into franchisees, and I started to franchise my brand locally in LA very organically. If someone came to me, I would tell them, oh, we're a franchise, you can take this. But I wasn't necessarily going out and being aggressive about it. So here we are, and we have 8 locations with organic growth. We have never advertised or done any kind of soliciting to get franchisees or even advertised in the brand itself. We haven't done any brand advertising. It's all been, editorial coverage and word of mouth. So yeah, so that brings us up to speed for Bellacures.
That's pretty amazing. It's interesting to kind of look back all these years ago. You did all this stuff, and then now you're talking about it kind of in this short breath of 2-3 minutes and summarizing it.
Yeah.
It just seems so easy and it just kind of flowed. But can you kind of take us back to that moment when you're like, okay, I'm leaving this very stable corporate job and I'm going to do something that is risky. And oh yeah, I'm going to start this nail salon, which is, something I don't really have experience in. I'm 22, something like that takes a lot of capital as well. So it's a huge financial risk as well. How did you go about navigating and figuring things out for yourself at such a kind of young age, but also at such a pivotal point in your life?
Well, the capital part, I ended up borrowing money. Well, I had to convince my parents. First of all, they were shocked I left my job. It took them a few months to register that just because it was a job that a lot of people fought for and it was prestigious at the time. And so once they got used to the idea that I was not going back to the corporate world, I convinced them to lend me money. And so I ended up borrowing a little over $100,000 from them and taking out 9 different personal credit cards.
Oh my God.
And put myself in credit card debt for a period of 2 or 3 years to kind of cash flow some business expenses, but more importantly, my life, because I hadn't actually thought through at the time, when you open a business, there's business expenses, but what about the entrepreneur? The entrepreneur has expenses too and they have to live. And I hadn't factored in what it meant to pay myself, which I actually wrote an article about on Inc. recently about, why you should pay yourself first. And that's a concept I did not know or was not even raised with really. It's always everything else gets met and then whatever's left over you take. And it's actually should be the opposite. So I put myself in debt over 9 different credit cards. And the answer about the risk part is that when you don't really have much to lose, it's not, I was at the time, I was 22 when I first started working on the project. I was living with my parents and I had very little expenses and not whole lot to lose except for the initial capital. So I think it didn't necessarily feel risky for me, especially because I was on the other end of this business. I've been a customer at nail salons for over 12 years already because I started getting my nails done when I was 12 years old. And I knew that there were people who get their nails done every week, and I knew that I could connect with them. So I think I had a very strong sense of confidence that there would definitely be customers. I didn't really consider all the other details. I was very tunnel visioned and focused, and I didn't feel like it was a big risk. I actually remember my friends telling me, like, what are you talking about? You're going to open a nail salon? Like, how do you know people are going to come to it? There's a bunch more on the street. I was like looking at them like they were the crazy one.
So maybe sometimes being like young and is kind of helpful because you're a little bit just, everything's going to be okay. You have time on your side. You'll figure it out. And I don't want to say there's this like naivete to it, but there's a little bit of like optimism that goes with maybe being younger.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's just being young. I think even, some people I know today in their 30s will take on projects and start ventures with blindfolds on. I think there's a benefit to it. I'm of the mentality to dive in and figure it out, because even if you fail, there's so much learning that happens from all the micro failures, or even, medium-sized failures, that experience is more valuable than an MBA, because you learn something for your next project. And to me, failure is when you're not trying. It's not when you're trying and it's not working. It's when you've stopped and you're not doing anything. So I think it's okay to not consider all the variables that could make your project go badly. I think it's okay to just kind of go in with a naive optimism, no matter what age you are.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm like the lawyer and I'm always like, what could go wrong, right? And so my thinking is always like focusing on the what ifs, even if there's like a 0.0001% chance of it happening. And this transition that I made in, running my own business has been about retraining my brain a little bit to think about, okay, you have to think about the possibility and what could happen versus what is going to go wrong. So, So, okay, cool. So you have been running this nail salon business, the Bellacures, you're moving along, and I know now you're also working on another venture, which is Fred and Far. So tell me about that. Tell me about how that evolved and what that's all about.
Yeah, so my best friend of 14 years, she is the seed of the concept. So Fred and Far is a brand around the idea of self-love and self-commitment, and this stemmed from our own personal experiences. And so a lot of the time, especially as women, we're raised with the mentality that we need to like give ourselves to something, and often give ourselves away or wait for somebody to give us something. And it's more than just like self-love and like love yourself and, make sure that you eat right and you're healthy and all of those sort of external things. But more importantly, it's about on the inside, like where your worth lies. And so a lot of the times we're like waiting to either get the right job or succeed at something, or perhaps, depending on the woman, get married. And after we get married, we're like waiting to have kids. There's always like this timeline of events that need to happen in order for us to feel like we're complete and whole. And so the brand is based on, having an entry point where you actually commit to yourself first. And from there, you become a better worker, a better mother, a better sister, a better wife, and better to yourself. And I think that it's changing the messaging that's out there, because especially with social media right now, there's a lot of messaging around like women not being enough and they need something to make them enough. And I think the enough comes from within and it does not come from the outside. So our goal is to create a community and a tribe and change the message. And we designed a self-commitment pinky ring, or self-love pinky ring. And it's shaped like a upside down triangle. It's a trillion shape. It's made of a lab created white sapphire. And the notion is to wear a symbol of self-commitment, so that when you look down at your hand every day, you remember to choose yourself. And choosing yourself really means so many different things. It could mean, not eating something, or it could mean eating something. Like, it just depends for you where you are at your life. Or it means waking up 5 minutes earlier so you can meditate, or maybe it means sleeping in an hour later so you could get that rest. So whatever it means for you, it's just about honoring yourself and who you are, where you're at in this very moment. So we started working on that company a year ago together, and in April it launched, and this past July it really just took off, and we've had incredible success and a flood of beautiful stories from women around the world sharing their very vulnerable journeys with us around, what made them realize that they need to love themselves. Often we have to go through some sort of like battle or war, whether it's like a bad relationship or just a struggle from within or some family stuff, to realize, okay, I'm number one. I have to take care of me first. And so those stories have been very powerful because they inspire other people to do the same.
Yeah, I love it. I know when I first heard about it, I was just like, this is just beautiful and inspiring in so many ways. And I was recently talking to a friend of mine. She just graduated. She just got her PhD. She's obviously super driven. And we were talking about how she goes, I never had an example of growing up. I didn't have an example of like putting myself first as like a woman, right? In the sense of like that self-care and all that, because a lot of our parents and our mothers, they would take care of everybody else first, and whatever, like you said, it's just kind of like that entrepreneurial thing. Like you take care of everything else and then whatever's left over, you pay yourself. So it's interesting seeing that parallel. And so I get it, but it's so hard to do in the day-to-day and to untrain yourself again, to think about, okay, how am I going to practice this? So what have been some of the stories or kind of, I don't want to say tips, but what are some suggestions that you have that women can like practice this actually and live it, like the philosophy of Fred and Far in their day-to-day?
That's a good question, because I think that people look for instruction around this stuff and there really isn't any. It's about like going within yourself and allowing yourself to feel what it is. So, if I'm speaking to someone and they're truly sad and in pain about something, it's about being sad and being in pain and having that be totally okay. I think there is this constant pressure in society for us to be happy and put together and, successful and pretty and well-dressed, in shape. And it's not a realistic expectation. We are fluid beings, and fluidity means that we're going to consistently evolve and flow from one feeling to another, from one state to another, and have, variation. And so I can tell someone, hey, self-care is about, why don't you practice yoga? But if you're not going to yoga from a place of feeling like you love yourself, then really the yoga is not really that beneficial. Mm-hmm. So you have to figure out what it is for yourself that makes you feel loved and worthy. And maybe it's just sitting on the couch and just being with yourself. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be doing something. So I think it's about the exploration and the journey to go within and to feel all of your feelings and to honor whatever you are in every moment. And that requires you to be with yourself in every moment, which a lot of people aren't. They leave themselves in every moment. Like they get stressed out because of something and they leave themselves behind because they're like going to tend to something. So does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. Yeah. I like that you pushed back on that question and, didn't give me like, oh, here are some tips. I do think maybe sometimes, we don't want to be with ourselves because we don't like ourselves or a certain aspect of our character maybe. And I think it's about learning to be your friend again and like learning to like love yourself again. And that's hard for people because I think especially women, we're our worst inner critics. And, we always say like, be nice to my friend because like you would never talk to your girlfriend like this, that self-criticism that you give yourself. And so maybe it might be helpful to, this might sound kind of weird, but maybe view yourself as like another person, like a third party, and talk to yourself as if it's a friend, not you who you are so hard on all the time and so judgmental of all the time.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And I would also say if there is a lot of judgment, instead of resisting it, just to actually like nurture it like you would another maybe judgmental person. Like maybe that judgment has something to share with you. Maybe the judgment is coming from some sort of pain. And I think that there's value in relating the aspects of yourself differently. So instead of resisting the judgment and forcing yourself to be nice to yourself, like actually like if you had to pretend like sitting down with, your judgment and being like, so talk to me, tell me what's wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think that helps self-soothe and to feel like you're hearing yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I like that you're not running away from, you're not trying to fit this mold. Like all of your suggestions are like just take what is and just sit with it and accept it.
Yeah.
And I really like that about what you're saying here today, because it's so hard to, and I've talked about this before about how like we're always raising the bar. We're always like, if this, and then once we get there, it's like, okay, well, this isn't that great. Like, let me raise the bar again, or like change direction. And it's just like being like a crazy person all the time. It's never going to stop. And maybe you need to stop and kind of just sit with yourself and just be like, yep, this is me. I like to spend my Saturdays watching HGTV all day.
Yeah.
Even though I should be working or...
to honor whatever it is that you feel in each moment, really. That's what it comes down to.
Cool. So you just have so much to offer. And I know you're also a writer. You write for a lot of great publications out there about entrepreneurship, about your experiences, about just all of this like knowledge and wisdom that you have. And I know one thing that we had previously talked about was just kind of like the art of delegation. And, you know, a lot of women, I think, have a hard time when they're running their own businesses, or even if they're not running their own business, just in that at home or whatever, they have a hard time letting go of things. And, you know, can you speak to that a little bit about just delegation and how that has, you know, maybe worked for you or hasn't worked for you in your own business and your own life?
Yeah, delegation is really important because we all need each other. You cannot do everything yourself. It's not feasible, and it's definitely, it won't get you anywhere. You need a team. So I break down delegation into two things. There's an article about this on Inc. as well. I break it down into, what are you delegating? Are you delegating a responsibility, or are you delegating a task? And the reason why it's important to differentiate between those two is because oftentimes people delegate a responsibility and treat it like a task. And you cannot do that, because if you're delegating a responsibility, you have to be on the same page with the other person about what the outcome is, but not on the same page about how to get there. You have to allow them the freedom to get to the outcome on their own time and on their own sort of
terms.
On their own terms and the way that they do it. Now, if you're delegating a task, like, for example, filing, then you don't just tell them these need to be filed. You tell them how to do it, what it needs to look like, and they do it the way that you would do it. So the instruction given around delegation is really important, because in order to delegate a responsibility successfully, you do need to give freedom with it. And along with that freedom comes the risk of the person not delivering. And so I think that oftentimes people get really frustrated with delegating because they will delegate an outcome and they won't give the responsibility to the person, like the amount of authority needed to get to that outcome. And so they feel like, if I'm telling you to do it, then why do you keep coming back to me? And it's like, well, because you didn't give them the tools that they need to get to that outcome. So it's about talking just about responsibility. You need to be on the same page about the outcome. You need to give them freedom, and you need to give them the authority to get to the potential outcome. And then the last and most important thing is you need to give them space to actually, deviate from the exact outcome that you have in mind. And if they do deviate, what that looks like if it's something that needs to be cleaned up, or if they mess up, that they also have the freedom to clean it up themselves and then come back to you again. And so I think that there needs to be a certain level of okayness with that process when you're delegating a responsibility. And oftentimes people are not okay with it because they hold so much fear. And I think that if they start with baby steps, so like if you're working on delegating to one individual a certain responsibility, if you start and give them a little responsibility and then you see it goes well, and then you give them another little, and then another medium, and then another medium, and sooner or later they're like earning their way up to a bigger responsibility role. Now, if you have somebody that's working for you that's just task oriented and they're not ever going to be responsible for anything, then you need to be extremely specific in exactly what it is that they need to do. So a really good example is that if you're hiring someone to clean, there are two ways to manage a cleaning person, right? You can say, this is how I want you to clean everything. And this is the product that I want you to use, and these are the towels that I want you to use. Or you could hire a cleaning person and say, I don't care what you use. I just want it to be clean and done by this time. And so it's really important when you're delegating to think of all these different pieces of the process. It's a win, not just for you, but for the other person, because there's nothing more frustrating than being on the other side. Imagine if you are being given something to do by somebody. There's nothing more frustrating than to feel like you're letting them down or you're failing them. But you as a leader, if you're not, delegating correctly and you're not setting it up for a win, it's not just a disappointment to you, it's also a disappointment to the person that you're delegating to. It makes them feel like a failure. So wow. I covered like a lot of different things.
Yeah. It was no, I loved it. And we're going to link up to those articles that you've mentioned in the show notes, because I think this is something that people need to process, because there's so much good stuff in there. I mean, just even the distinction of a responsibility versus a task, right? Even that awareness is it feels different when you even say it, right? Task feels very short term, very discrete. Responsibility seems like maybe an area in your business or your life. And and even the types of people that you're looking for to do that for you is different, right? You need certain types of skill sets if you're, delegating responsibility, and you have to have a certain level of trust as well. You've got to build that up. So that was amazing. And it's funny that you brought up the cleaning person example, because we just hired somebody yesterday and she's starting next week, and I've never had one before. Okay. So I'm like, how am I going to, am I delegating tasks or responsibilities? But basically it's a responsibility. I don't want to have anything to do with it. So
yeah, see, it's good that you're clear on that, because a lot of people, they don't know what it is that they want to give their cleaning lady, and then they get frustrated with the outcome. I think it's about being clear with yourself first so that you can actually communicate properly with the person that you're hiring.
Yeah. And I think what happens with a lot of folks that I talk to is we get to the point that we're so desperate for help that we just bring somebody on. And I think it's helpful to anticipate this need in advance and start working on bringing those people in slowly to maybe teach yourself how to delegate and how to relinquish control, and just see that coming kind of in the horizon and be proactive about it, and not oh my gosh, I'm so stressed, I need anybody to help me tomorrow, Yeah. So, and yeah, I think just your whole feedback about the other person's perspective is, how are they feeling? How are they going to respond to the way in which you're delegating is awesome. So
yeah, thank you.
My brain is poo, poo. Awesome. So I suspect that you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, through your writing and just through just being who you are. You could probably come in touch with a lot of folks who are on this journey. What are some we talked about some of them right today, but what are some tips that you could give to people who want to find that better balance of the work that they do, not defining them, and being the work is just something, it's a part of who they are, but it's not everything that they are. Do you have any kind of insight on that you could share with folks on that topic?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It took me several years to get there myself in my own journey. I think the more that you develop your relationship with yourself and your own strengths, your own capabilities, skills, your feelings, basically imagine that you're dating yourself, right? So in the beginning, you're just getting to know the surface level personality traits, and then you get maybe to know the emotions, but then you get to test yourself as an entrepreneur. What are you really capable of? What can you handle? What can you produce? And once you have that strong foundation where you're in a solid, committed relationship with yourself, going back to Fred and Far, you start to feel like you're you and your business is just one thing that you produce, but you have the potential to produce maybe 10 or 20 other things. And your business is just one part of your life. It's not your entire life, and it's certainly not who you are, because you're you, and you are comprised of a whole bunch of things outside of just being able to produce. You are, an emotional being. You are a physical being. I mean, you can definitely, I think people can feel themselves when they work out or when they meditate, when you're physically active and when you're engaging in other things other than work. And you can actually, take yourself there, not take yourself there physically, but be thinking about work, but actually take your entire being to other activities and really truly be with yourself. Then from that place, you can feel that your company or whatever it is that you're working on, whatever project it is, it doesn't define you. It's just a production of your greatness. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you've given us so many great ways to start thinking about ourselves and how we relate to ourselves, our friend inside ourselves, and just how we relate to the world outside of ourselves or our businesses or our projects. I mean, I know for me, being an entrepreneur and just going down this journey has been I've been very self-reflective my whole life, but this has really put the spotlight on it, and it's forced me to look at myself and confront certain things I don't really love about myself, and certain things that I do. And it's been such a journey, and I think it's part of the human journey. It's not just an entrepreneurial thing. I just think when you have your own business, you're just forced to deal with some of those things. So thank you so much. I mean, my brain is like, pow, it's like poof. I just really enjoyed our conversation, and just wanted to wrap it up with the question that I ask all of my guests, which is one thing I know for sure is, and you can fill in the blank.
Okay. So I'm going to be like a little funny with this one, but one thing that I know for sure is that I don't know anything for sure. that all of our experiences are unknown. What's to come is unknown, and that as long as I'm with myself, I can be in the unknown and experience whatever is to come, and that is okay, whatever it may be. I feel like we're, as human beings, looking for something to hold on to or to grasp on, whether it's shopping or food or job or relationships or whatever it is, but to actually feel like you don't need to grasp onto anything, that you don't need to know anything for sure, is actually really liberating. So I think that that's another, way to exist and try on and see how it feels. So yeah, that's what I'm going to leave you with.
No, just the thought of that, it does feel freeing. This idea of just always being in that kind of that gray area. And I know when I went to law school and I started doing the whole law thing, I was like, but there's so many shades of gray. I hate it. I had a business background. I wanted to know the formula. I wanted to know 1 + 1 = 2. And then I realized, that's what's the beauty of the law is those shades of gray, because that leaves you that wiggle room to make an argument that maybe hasn't been made before, or to interpret facts a certain way. And then I guess that's true of life as well, right? It's those shades of gray that you want to be in, because that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Magic.
Well, thank you, Samira. Thank you so much for joining me today. And we can't wait to see what else you come up with in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So there you go, my friend. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Samira and learned a lot. If you'd like to learn more about Samira and all of her endeavors, including reading some of the articles that she's written for Inc.com, head on over to the show notes at AnnetteStepanian.com/podcast/18. Now, if you're listening to this at the time of the recording, we are at the end of 2016. I'm going to be just taking a few days off just to hang out, chill out with my family, my new puppies, and sit by the Christmas tree. So there won't be a new episode next week, but I'll be back on January 4th, 2017 with a brand new episode of Office Talk. If you find that you have some extra time on your hands, or maybe your family is just driving you crazy and you just need some alone time, Come on, admit it, we all do. Then make sure to listen to some of the past episodes if you haven't caught up with all of them yet. A few that have been really popular so far have been the ones with Brooke Saxon Spencer of Belong Mag, the one with Michelle Loretta of Sage Wedding Pros, and the one with Megan Setti of M Collaborative, or just listen to them from the beginning. As I sign off for one last time in 2016, I want to wish you and yours the merriest, the warmest, and the happiest of holidays. And as we enter 2017, I hope it is full of health, joy, and happiness for you and all of your loved ones. I'll see you back here on January 4th, and I can't wait to talk to you later.